Okay, this is going to be tricky because I tend to move my hands, which means, all right, I will have to behave myself. All right, we'll start over. Before we begin this journey with Paul, we need a little background information about sea travel during this time. The ships had one fixed square mast and sometimes a smaller mast at the beginning. Well, a sail. Was it a mast? I don't know. In the front. They lacked the ability to tack, so they were much more at the mercy of the winds. There were many smaller ships which sailed to the various ports around the Mediterranean. The grain ships, which we'll see Paul on his second ship, took wheat and barley from North Africa or from Egypt to Rome, and they were the largest fleet ships in the commercial fleet. And they were built to handle the open sea, assuming it was summer. They were long. They could be up to 180 feet, and they carried between 350 and 1,000 tons of grain. So they are very big, they are very heavy, and they don't manipulate well in a storm. The prime sailing season was in summer, so that was considered from May 27th to September 14th. The weather in the spring and in the fall was kind of iffy. The winds were often uncooperative, and it was just more dangerous. Those time seasons were March 10th to May 26th, and September 15th to November 11th. And then nobody sailed in winter. Even actually a lot of land traffic came to a halt. The winds generally flowed from northwest, so the trip from Rome to Egypt would take like 9 to 13 days. But because they couldn't sail into the wind, the ships, both large and small, would kind of hug the shore, go up like past Caesarea, across Turkey, and then kind of island hop over to Italy. And that trip could take between 40 and 60 days. Another interesting fact about sailing then is there were no passenger ships. There were very, very few ships that had cabins of any kind in them. So if you wanted to get from Caesarea to Rome, you found some cargo ship that was in Caesarea, you went as far as it could go, and then you found another one in that port to keep hopping your way along to Rome or wherever you were going. Passengers would bring blankets to curl up in at night on the deck, or they also had little tents that you could set up at night on the deck. I'll bet that was just so much fun in this storm. They also had to provide all of their own supplies and all of their own food. The only thing that the ship would supply would be water. This is not exactly Carnival cruise days. But they did carry quite a few people. We know that Paul's ship had 276. Josephus was said to have traveled to Rome, camped out with 600 people on a deck. So, yeah, you could just have a great time. Paul is traveling to Rome with Luke, Aristarchus, Julius, and the other soldiers, an unknown number of criminals, we don't know how many, and then the other paying guests. Most of the prisoners who were being taken to Rome would have ended up in the amphitheater, where their deaths would have been part of the entertainment. So when they don't want to lose prisoners, you could see why if you were a prisoner, you would like to get lost. And Julius found a smaller ship, and he goes, the home port of that one was north of Ephesus. So on our little map, their home port was actually up here, which is why they get off at Myra and pick up another ship there, because the grain ships didn't go up in that area between Turkey and Greece. So Julius showed Paul a lot of kindness, although in Sidon, when he allows him to go stay with his friends, though he would have had a guard tagging along, it's also a benefit to Julius because Julius doesn't have to pay for his food and pay for his lodging. So the ships worked their way up the coast, kind of going up here, and this whole journey is really slow because the winds are against them. They're sailing this way, and the winds are coming this way, and it's fall. So the winds are always more cantankerous in fall. And then they get to Fair Havens, which, despite its name, was just not a great place to winter over. It's a small place. It's not a great one to hang out. And it doesn't handle the big grain ships very well. The port was just not that big. So there's a lot of discussion about whether they want to stay there. But it's also getting late. The Jews were not seafaring people. If you think of the ocean, sea kind of stories in the Bible, they're almost all negative, stormy, scary. Paul had traveled quite a bit, so he was comfortable giving advice about staying in Fair Havens. And we know of several trips that are recorded in Acts. But in his letter to the Corinthians, Paul talks about 3 other shipwrecks he's been in. One of them, he floated in the water for a day and a half. That letter is written before he goes to Jerusalem. So these are really stories that we don't know. So he's got a lot of journeys that we know nothing about. But even with that experience, my first reaction was, well, of course you would listen to the owner and the captain. I mean, they're the experts. But it turns out they may have had motivations that were stronger than safety. So Rome provided free bread for everybody. That was one of the ways that they kept people happy. They went through a lot of grain. It was estimated that at this point they used probably 250,000 tons of grain a year. And about a third of that comes from Egypt. So these grain barges are pretty important. And they would get bonuses if they arrived with grain during that fall time because it was more dangerous. And also, the government would insure your ship and your cargo so that if you did go down, you didn't lose your money. So taking a risk was kind of worth it sometimes, though it was pointed out that it could cost your life. But if they could get there, they could possibly make 2 trips in 1 year, or like in this case, even if they can't get to Rome, if they could get on to a better port and get a little further down the journey, they might be able to get 2 trips in the next year. And really, the harbor in Phoenix isn't very far away. It's only one long sail, 1 day in summer. This, however, is not summer. The gentle south wind, which gave the captain and the owner assurance that it was safe to leave and to go to Phoenix, didn't last very long. Soon they found themselves caught in a wind of hurricane force. And the Greek there is the word that is the root for our word typhoon. So not just strong winds, but crazy swirling winds and swirling waves. Luke calls it a northeaster. And historically, throughout the time when traveling in the Mediterranean was powered by sails, the northeaster was the most feared weather pattern. This ship couldn't head into the wind, so they just let it blow them. And the storm went on for days. They went from storm-tossed dark of night to storm-tossed gray of wet, cloudy days, and they repeated the cycle over and over and over. Despair eventually sets in, but the sailors keep trying to do what they can, and I think the passengers just waited, scared, and maybe felt useless because all they could do was watch. All navigation in those days was done by watching the skies, the sun by day and the stars by night. The ship had been driven for days, and they had not seen the sun or stars since the storm began. They had no idea where they were. The Mediterranean is pretty big for having no idea where you are. By the time they actually reach land, they have gone over 500 miles away from Fairhaven. Luke says that they are afraid that they might run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, which this day is called the Gulf of Sidra. And they really were something to be avoided. Gordon Franz, in his book Life and Land, quotes two different ancient authors that talk about this area. So in the mid-300s BC, in Jason and the Golden Fleece, they talk about a ship that was hit with a deadly blast of north wind that seized them mid-course and carried them toward the Libyan Sea for 9 whole nights and as many days, until they came to Syrtis, the legendary shoals and desert coast of Libya, where ships became stranded, where there is no getting out again for ships once they are forced to enter that gulf. For everywhere there are shallows, everywhere are thickets of seaweed from the depths, and over them silently washes the foam of water. So the land there is shifting sand dunes, and basically under the water are also shifting sand dunes, except they shift not with the wind, but with the wave. So there is no clear path through that, because the path that is there will be different next month. So really hard once you get stuck in that. And then there are rocks. Later, AD 560, so quite a bit later, there was an author that wrote, "When the ship, driven by wind and wave, gets inside the opening of the Gulf, it is then impossible for it to return. But from that moment, it seems to be drawn. It appears distinctly to be dragged steadily forward. On the other hand, it is not possible for ships to make their way for shore, for the submerged rocks scattered over the greater part of the Gulf do not permit sailing there, since they destroy the ships in the shoal. Only in small boats." So the small boat would be like the little skiff that was on Paul's ship. "Are sailors of such ships able to save themselves, with good luck, by plucking their way amid the perils of the outlet." So the fear that they are feeling is really justified. You also have storms in your life. It's kind of guaranteed, because life just comes equipped with storms. Some of them are wild and crazy, and they blow us off course. Some of us suck us in like the sandbars, where we can get stuck or shipwrecked on hidden rocks. And not all storms have the intensity of Paul's storm, but it's not that unusual for us to have some intense storms. And even small storms can bring fear and anxiety. There are people that we love in all of our lives who are in storms right now. There are people around the world that we don't even know, and yet our hearts hurt because of the pain of their storms. And you might be in the midst of a storm right at this moment. So we're going to take some time to pray for people that are caught in northeasters. So we're going to take about 5 minutes, and I'd like you to clump in 2s or 3s, or if you'd rather sit by yourself, you can, and just pray for the people that are on your heart. And then we'll come back and we will continue our story. When they had gone without food for a long time, Paul urged them to eat. They had not eaten for days. For some, they had probably just been so busy trying to keep the boat together that their own needs were ignored. Most of the passengers were probably just trying to stay out of the way. But all were feeling fear and anxiety. Imagine what that would have been like. Crouching, wet and cold on that wind-blown deck. Or maybe squishing together with other passengers in the very small area of the hold where food was kept for the crew. It sure wouldn't hold 276 people. But at least there they would be out of the wind, although still getting bounced around as the storm buffets the buffets the ship and knocks it around. Just had to be incredibly uncomfortable, and not necessarily makes you want to go find your food and eat it, assuming it wasn't already soggy and inedible. But Paul offered more than food. He offered hope. Now I urge you to keep up your courage. Last night, the angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. Now let's stop and look at that a minute. Almost everybody on that ship would have been Gentiles. They understood serving the gods. They sacrificed to their gods before every voyage, hoping for favor and safe travels. But when Paul speaks, he frames his relationship with his God in a very different way. The God to whom I belong. God had said to the Jews, I will be your God and you will be my people. Paul knew that that message was for him individually as well. And it is what God says to you and to me. There is an intimacy in the belonging that we have with our God. And Paul knew that even in the midst of this crazy storm, God said, you are mine. He was still God's child, beloved and protected. Paul could think clearly when others were overwhelmed by fear and despair. He was calm. He could take charge, which is a little odd, isn't it? This prisoner is the one that's giving all this advice. God had said that he would testify in Rome. 2 years of twiddling his thumb in chains in Caesarea did not change that promise. Getting caught in a very scary Mediterranean storm didn't change that promise either. Paul trusted the promise of God to whom he belonged. He knew he was going to make it to Rome. And God, in his gracious mercy, gifted Paul the lives of all of the other people on that ship. And Paul believed that promise as well. Keep up your courage, men. I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Now I urge you to keep up your courage. He was absolutely convinced that he was going to live, and so were they. He offers his shipmates hope, and he offers them a little bit of his faith when they don't have faith on their own. There are many times when we are called upon to do that for our sisters who are struggling. Sometimes we just can't generate the faith and the hope. But maybe we can cling to hope that a sister who loves us is reaching out her hand with that hope, and we can hang on to her hope. May we have the sensitivity and the courage to be that for one another when storms hit. Some of the sailors attempted to leave the ship in the little skiff. Paul noticed, warned Julius, and the sailors cut the rope, letting the little skiff fall away into the sea. There was nothing magical about having everybody on board. But if you are sailing through crazy, dangerous waters, and you don't have sailors that actually know what they're doing on board with you, you are in a world of hurt. This was just a matter of being sure they kept the experts with them when they needed them. I found a real interesting article written by a man from Malta. It's called St. Paul's Voyage and the Shipwreck, written by Mark Gatt in Times Malta. It's amazing the things you can find online. So his premise is that part of God's plan to protect Paul was the provision of a very competent captain. So I'm going to condense the article for you and just read it. Sailing across the Mediterranean in a heavily laden ship with one mainsail for propulsion and poor steering is very risky. Here, the ship drifted for 14 days, but it doesn't mean that nothing was being done to save the ship and to save lives. It was obvious that as soon as they got caught in the strong winds, the captain ordered the steering oars to be secured and the mainsail brought down so as not to lose either of them. It doesn't tell us that he did that, but the reason, and this guy builds it, that we know that is because in verse 40, they reversed the process. They let the oars out, and there's only two. They were for steering, not for rowing, and they put a sail up. They brought the skiff, which they were towing up onto the deck. This skiff would be used to carry mooring ropes when entering harbors, and also used for ship-to-shore transport of passengers and goods. It was towed along behind while sailing along the coast. Bringing the skiff aboard was the normal thing to do, but because of the storm, they did it with great difficulty. Oops. Sorry. The ship was heavily laden with grain. In the strong seas, the seawater would enter the planks, would enter the holds through the wooden planks. If the grain got wet, it expanded, and it would push against the planks further out, making bigger cracks and letting in more water. So the captain ordered that the ship be frapped by running ropes under the ship and undergirding it, holding the planks firmly together, allowing less water to seep into the hold. The ship was in a dangerous predicament. No mainsail, foresail, or steering oars amounts to no steering at all. So the experienced captain ordered that they deploy the sea anchor. The sea anchor is like a parachute that was tied to the stern of the ship and creates drag. It would lessen the rate of drift considerably. Luke tells us that they feared ending in the Libyan coast and that they deployed the sea anchor. It is my theory that this experienced captain had the sea anchor tied to the stern's starboard side, the right side, of the rear ship. That would have created drag, but it would also have made the ship sail slightly more west-northwest rather than toward the south. In my humble opinion, the sea anchor was the mechanism that brought Paul's ship to Malta. Okay, so nobody actually knows what this journey was. They didn't have soundings and landings, but you can see that if they're sailing here and they're getting blown southwest, it is real easy to end up down here, which was the graveyard for ships. So what this guy is saying is because of the way they put the sea anchor on, it's what kind of tipped them up so that they ended up going up a little bit north. Let's see. They took soundings and found 20 fathoms. So 20 fathoms is 120 feet. Soon afterwards, it was 15, which is 90 feet. Can you imagine how scary that would have been? It is pitch dark. You are exhausted. You're more hungry than you actually realize. And you know that you are rapidly approaching land. And that might be good, or that might be very bad, because you have no idea where you are. You don't know what this land is. With the land approaching, the captain ordered 2 anchors dropped from the stern. The captain's main intention shows considerable foresight. He wanted to drop anchors and wait for dawn so he could see. With sunlight, he could then decide what course to take. Head for a beach, go port, go starboard, go straight ahead. Whatever course he took, it would meant that he would treat those anchors differently. If he wanted to go to straight ahead, he would have to cut all 4 anchors together. If he wanted to go starboard, to go right, then he would start out by cutting the 2 that were on the left side, the port side, and vice versa. So the last thing that he ends up ordering is that the sail go up, and they take the steering oars down, and just before that, they unloaded some more grain. It takes more than a week to unload their ship when they're in port, so they're not getting it all out, but they're taking enough out that it will ride higher and maybe go all the way in to the bay, which we know didn't happen. Made it part way in, got stuck on a sandbar, and the waves coming from behind just start ripping the ship apart. So anybody who can swim jumps off and heads toward the beach. Anybody else grabs one of these pieces of plank of ship and hangs on as the waves roll them in toward the shore. And then it says, and they all safely made it. And you can sort of hear the sigh of relief in that. We're here. The scariest trip of their life is over and everyone is safe. However, they are still a long way from Rome. So, to be continued.